Every winter, after the first heavy snowfall settled overnight, I would wake before sunrise and find them. A single trail of fresh footprints cutting across the untouched field behind our convent, threading into the frozen forest, and disappearing completely near the abandoned chapel on the far hill. No footprints returning, no tracks leading back. Just one direction, one purpose, and then nothing. For 11 years, I watched them appear. For 11 years, every reasonable explanation I offered myself quietly collapsed by morning light. And then, on the 12th winter, I finally stopped watching and started following. What I found at the end of that trail did not frighten me. It completely broke my heart open. And I have never been the same. Before this story ends, you will understand why those footprints were never hiding something dangerous. They were quietly protecting a story that history almost forgot entirely. To understand why I stepped into those footprints before anyone else could erase them, you first need to understand who I was before any of this began. My name is Sister Margaret. I came to the convent of St. Bridget when I was 26 years old, not because the world had been cruel to me, but because silence felt more honest to me than noise ever had. I grew up in a small Minnesota town where winters came early and stayed long, so when I arrived at our convent in the wooded hills of northern Wisconsin, the cold already felt familiar, like coming home to something ancient. Our convent was built in 1887, and you could feel every decade of that in the stone walls. The building sat at the edge of a pine forest so dense that by November the trees pressed against the windows like patient visitors. Beyond the forest, if you walked far enough, you reached a frozen river, two abandoned farmhouses, a cemetery with headstones so weathered the names had nearly surrendered to time, and finally, a small stone chapel that had been empty since before anyone living could clearly remember. No one used the chapel, no one repaired it. We simply left it there, the way you leave certain memories alone because disturbing them feels wrong somehow. I loved that land completely. Every morning before lauds, I walked through the snow in my heavy coat and boots, just breathing the cold air and watching the forest shift and settle. I was not a superstitious woman. I believed in evidence. I believed in questions asked honestly and answers earned patiently. So when the footprints first appeared during my second winter at St. Bridget's, my first reaction was not fear. It was simply curiosity that I could not quiet down. The other sisters had their own feelings about the footprints. Sister Clare said they were the steps of a wandering soul seeking peace. Old Sister Gertrude, who had been at the convent for 40 years, said the footprints appeared long before she arrived, and she always crossed herself when she mentioned them. The villagers down the road had stories that ranged from escaped prisoners to restless spirits to something they called the Winter Walker, a figure in local legend that nobody could fully describe, but everybody seemed certain was real. Children dared each other every February to walk toward the forest alone at dusk. None of them ever actually went, but I noticed things the storytellers missed. Because I walked that field every single morning, I understood the snow. And the footprints were not random. They were consistent. Boot prints, roughly a men's size 10, spaced about 28 inches apart, with the measured, deliberate stride of someone walking with intention rather than wandering. Always appearing after the first significant snowfall of each year, always pointing the same direction, always stopping at the same location near the chapel's crumbling east wall. That consistency troubled me more than any ghost story ever could. Ghosts, if you believed in them, had no reason for routine, but a person with a reason? That was something else entirely. In my 7th winter, I found the first clue that changed everything. I was cataloging old convent records in the basement archive, looking for nothing in particular, when I found a weather journal kept by the founding sisters. Most of it was mundane: temperatures, snowfall measurements, dates of frozen pipes. But one entry dated February 1943 made me sit down very slowly and read it 3 times. It said simply, "The Prince again. Brother Anton counted 11 souls this season. God willing, the road holds." And then nothing. No explanation. No names beyond Brother Anton. Just those 2 quiet sentences sitting in the middle of an ordinary journal like a stone dropped into still water. 11 souls. The road holds. I stayed in that archive until supper thinking about what those words meant. Brother Anton. I started there. Our convent had no monk attached to it, but the village had once had a small Franciscan residence, long since closed. I drove to the County Historical Society on my one free afternoon that month and spent 4 hours in their records room. I found a handwritten register from 1941 listing a Brother Anton Vasek, a Czech immigrant who had arrived in the region in 1938 and served as a lay brother at the Franciscan house until the residence closed in 1951. After that, the official records showed nothing. He simply stopped appearing in any document I could locate. But one elderly woman in the village, a 91-year-old named Helen Dvorak, whose grandmother had lived on the farm road near our forest, remembered something. When I visited her and described what I had found, she went very quiet for a long moment. Then she said, almost to herself, "My grandmother called him the one who walked the cold road." She said Brother Anton had helped people, families, during the war. She could not say more than that because her grandmother had never said more than that, only that it was something that needed to stay quiet for a very long time. Families, during the war. That phrase sat inside me like an ember through the entire drive back to the convent. I requested access to diocesan archives the following month. It took 6 weeks to receive permission and 3 more weeks to actually locate the relevant boxes. Inside one of them, buried beneath parish correspondence from the 1950s, I found a sealed envelope that had never been opened. The outside was labeled only with the word "continuation" in neat, careful handwriting. My hands were shaking when I broke the seal. Inside was a partial diary, 31 pages, written by Brother Anton himself. He wrote in a mixture of Czech and English, and I had to photograph every page and spend 2 weeks translating sections with help from a retired professor at the university 2 hours away. But what emerged from those pages was one of the most quietly extraordinary things I have ever read in my life. During the winters of 1942 through 1949, Brother Anton had been walking. Every year, after the first heavy snowfall, he left before sunrise, crossed the open field, moved through the forest, and arrived at the abandoned chapel, which was not abandoned at all during those years. It was a waypoint, a resting place, a handoff location. Brother Anton had been part of a small, informal network of local farmers, priests, and ordinary neighbors who were quietly moving displaced families, Jewish refugees, and persecuted individuals through the region, connecting them to safer routes northward. The chapel, isolated and forgotten, was the last warm shelter before the final leg of the journey. He always walked in fresh snow deliberately, he wrote, because his footprints helped the families following a half-mile behind him know the path was clear and passable. If they saw his trail continuing unbroken, they walked forward. If it stopped or turned, they knew to wait. He walked ahead of them every single time, so that any danger found him first. I sat with that for a very long time. He had kept no names in his diary to protect the people he helped. He wrote only numbers: 11 souls in 1943, 7 in 1944, 14 in 1945. By 1949, the last entry, he had counted 83 people moved through that chapel to safety. 83 lives who passed through our frozen forest while the world was too loud and too frightened to notice. And every year, Brother Anton returned to walk the path again on the anniversary of the first crossing, alone now, just to remember, to honor the road, to keep the promise alive even after the need had passed. He continued until he died in the winter of 1961. The diary ended there, but the footprints did not. That realization hit me like cold water. Brother Anton had been gone for decades, so who had been walking? It took me 4 more months and a conversation with a woman named Petra, a schoolteacher from the village whose grandfather had been one of Brother Anton's closest allies, to find the answer. After Brother Anton died, his closest neighbor, an old farmer named Joseph, had continued the walk every year because he had made a promise to keep the memory alive. When Joseph died, his son continued. When his son could no longer manage the cold, his daughter had taken over. Petra herself had been walking the path for the past 11 years. She had never told anyone because the family had always believed the walk was private, sacred, something you did quietly, not for recognition, but because some promises do not expire just because the person who made them is gone. She cried when I showed her the diary pages, and I cried with her. We worked together after that, Petra and I and a small team of local historians and diocesan archivists, to properly document and preserve everything. The abandoned chapel was carefully restored. A small memorial plaque was installed inside, listing no names to honor the privacy Brother Anton had always protected, but acknowledging the 83. The diocesan archive formally cataloged the diary. A local university included the story in a regional history of wartime civilian rescue networks. And every winter since, when the first heavy snow falls, Petra still walks the path. Now sometimes I walk beside her. We go in silence mostly. Just the sound of our boots pressing into the untouched white field, the forest closing gently around us, the old chapel waiting at the end of the trail. I think about Brother Anton every single time. About a man who walked through the dark and the cold, not because anyone would ever know his name, but because 83 people needed someone to go first. Someone to make sure the road was safe before they trusted it with their lives. That is not legend. That is not mystery. That is the quietest and most extraordinary kind of courage I have ever encountered. Some people leave footprints in the snow for only one season, but the path they made by walking it, that lasts forever. The most remarkable mysteries I have ever known were never waiting to frighten me. They were waiting, patiently and faithfully, for someone willing to follow them all the way to the truth. Now I want to ask you something. If you had seen those footprints appearing every winter in the untouched snow outside your window, would you have followed them into that frozen forest? Or would you have turned back at the first moment the path felt uncertain? Tell me honestly in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if this story completely changed what you expected those footprints to mean, please share it, because some stories deserve to be remembered by more than just the people who were there to walk them.